Greetings. Welcome to this seminar about how to offer spiritual support to adult survivors of child sexual abuse by clergy or also other trusted authorities. In these days when there's still quite a lot of hurt and rancor and distrust in the church, this seminar is simply a very small, one single person's act of hope to help you help others. This seminar is offered to everyone who cares about people who've survived child sexual abuse, in this case particularly those who've survived abuse by clergy, but everyone. You know, you already encounter us, survivors of abuse, daily, whether you know it or not, in churches and in schools, in hospitals and hospice, in food centers, at the gala of the affluent, in the pews. The least I can do is offer guidance on the dialogue. I'm qualified to offer this brief, unfortunately, because of firsthand experience. In a diocese far, far away from where I live now, I was a victim of clergy abuse from about age 7 through 19. This abuse involved child sexual abuse, but also emotional abuse, what I understood then to be absolute cruelty. Currently, I live in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Diocese of Arlington. I speak and publish here under the surname Pitt Green, which is a pseudonym. It's one way I protect family and others from my choice to speak openly. And this seminar is drawn from speeches, retreats, and workshops I've offered under the auspices of the Diocese of Arlington and a little bit under working with the USCCB. But most importantly, this has been prepared and is presented without their involvement or approval. Now, a quick introduction can only offer you so much. There are many more resources at my website, teresagreen.org. My goals are simple. I wish to encourage victims to integrate faith with their recovery programs. Helping you do so could help even more of them. And also, I am in the process of reconciling with the Church, one Catholic at a time. Now, that may include you who are listening now. If so, thank you so much for helping me achieve my goals. Here's what I call the trajectory of hope. It applies to some, not all, survivors of child sexual abuse, as well as to others who have been victims of violence, and to most people with post-traumatic stress disorder. What you learn here, by the way, can help you help many others, besides survivors of child abuse, such as myself. Now, first there is abuse, and then there's the impact of abuse. The impact lasts long after the incidents end. That cringe of pain from the initial impact, it can continue far into adult life until care is administered to the wound. So being a victim can last a very long time. Another way to look at it is the victim's mindset exists simply because that's how we experienced life from a very early age, before we really knew there were even options. And now there are options. As adults, recovery can begin. At some point, most, not all of us, come face to face with what happened. Sometimes it takes a crisis to get us there. Sometimes it just happens. We thought we got past it only to find out we didn't. So we're usually shocked, resentful, full of a lot of upset and many different feelings. And that's exactly how recovery begins. The process is messy, it's painful, it can disrupt life's routines, it disrupts relationships. But the process does pass if we keep at it. You can quote me on that. And after what happens, well, it varies person to person. Some survivors I know get to a point when it's as if the past is gone, all its power removed. Most survivors I know, including myself, enjoy some of that sometimes. What we all have had to do is integrate memories into our current life. And what we all have managed to do is manage the lasting impact. What challenges remain to each of us vary widely, but for all of us, it takes time. My recovery kicked off in 1984, and it continued in fits and starts over 3 decades. In my case, I suspect it will continue my entire life. So now that we've just looked at the trajectory of hope, let's consider the nature of the impact of the abuser on the life of the abused child, but also on the life of the adult who grows up from that abused child, and on their faith. A child is obedient before authority, especially trusted authority. Here's the first lesson the predator teaches us. To obey is to be harmed. To surrender is dangerous. Not only are we harmed personally, but our life is completely upended. Order, security, as we understand it, is annihilated in an instant, never to return. So to us, surrender, the surrender of faith, which is about freedom, actually becomes a thing of fear, of harm. In fact, it can be impossible for us. Now, child predators groom their prey methodically. That's a well-studied fact. They use all sorts of tricks to earn our trust, our complete trust, so that our guard is removed. Grooming is all about seeming to care. And the lasting lesson here, caring overtures can be dangerous. Care itself can have a hidden agenda. How we survivors respond to that lesson varies, of course, but it's fairly common that we find trusting almost impossible. In fact, to trust is to put oneself in grave danger. Church leaders are priests, and what do priests do but forgive? Yet with abusers, forgiveness was perverted. Forgiveness became enabling. We victims survived a horrible fate to realize that the people who victimized us were enabled, and then we watched forgiveness and mercy offered to them and withheld from us in most cases. How were we to reconcile the complicity with our exile in the matter of something that is as cornerstone and beautiful as mercy and forgiveness in our faith? It was very difficult. Little wonder, between predators and their enablers, survivors of clergy abuse found the sacred to be dangerous. But the truth is, the sacred is not dangerous, and that's one example how truth fell victim too. In my experience, the worst part was not physical pain, which was terrible. It was devastating, but it passed. The worst part were all the secrets, all the lies that isolated me. The inability to tell the truth to anyone isolated me. The certainty of never being believed isolated me. Like a weakened creature in a herd of animals, I was more likely to be preyed upon by subsequent predators and that subhuman impulse of child abuse. And the fact is, that's exactly what happened. And in this setting, truth has no place in relationships, leaving the prey isolated. Trust is not possible, and that's a wisdom. Relationships suffer. Indeed, where there is abuse, relationships rupture. The family is fractured, no longer safe. The predator's secrets isolate family members from each other. The secrets remain obstacles to friendships at any age. And these ruptures in how we are connected expand from the child and the family to schools, parishes, communities. All these people suffered my wounds, and by one degree or more degree of separation, they were all in some way vicariously wounded. Now, the impact of abuse lingers for a long time. For many, not all, it takes a long time to unlearn the lessons of the abuser. My website has all sorts of information about treatment options. If you move forward in spiritually nourishing friendships with victims of abuse, they're likely to rely on one or more of these options, and that's good. We really do have to sew together a patchwork quilt that helps each of us individually, and you certainly can't be a spiritual guide and a therapist, for example, at the same time. But it's important to know how these run and how they go, because your goal is to help each person integrate their Christian faith, their Catholic faith in the process. Now, some of the people with whom you work may remain Catholic, as I did. Others may opt for Christian denominations that are not Catholic. And others still may simply need to make peace with the church that wounded them so they can move forward in a free relationship with God in whatever setting feels safer. So now let's spend just a few moments considering how to make your early encounter with the survivor of abuse safe. I have another seminar that follows this on logistics of how to even make a room safe, how to approach the person, how to prepare for the appointment. But for now, let's just consider the miracles, the miracle of the person standing in front of you and how they may present themselves to you. Many and not all of us survivors grapple with a lot of overwhelming feelings. Here I've listed just a few. Some, and not all of us, may seem quite difficult when you first meet us. Well, here's the thing. The feelings are difficult for us to handle too, and we're struggling too. Take distrust, for example. Distrust is an entirely sane response to the lessons we learned as children. If some highly respected authority figure can harm you and get away with it, whom can anybody really trust? So some of us may seem distant or aloof or even prickly and touchy. The first time I called the diocese here in Arlington about, I think about almost 10 years ago, I didn't ask about the program of outreach I was calling. I didn't even say hello. My first words were gruff, on purpose, and carefully practiced. I said, "Is this window dressing?" hoping to throw the woman off her game. The woman who answered the phone and I are now friends, but that was a decade ago, so be patient. I don't know a single survivor of abuse who has not been at some point very angry. Let me say 3 things about anger. First, anger is a very effective defense. That is, if you roar like a lion, it really does reduce the number of predators in your life. Second, anger is the only moral response to the evil done me. Oh, that a bishop's outrage hadn't trumped all the counselors back when I was a child. But sadly, that was not to be. Third, that anger will come in handy when the going gets tough. And in therapy, the going will get tough, I assure you, before it gets better. There's hell ahead, and people can use that anger as fuel. I sure did. Now, most of us survivors have one or more defensive attributes in our makeup. For many of us, it's a kind of hypervigilance. It also can be seen in little quirks, some a little bit comical. For example, a room of survivors and I once discovered all together that we all sit closest to the door to facilitate escaping, just in case. The problem was there were a lot more survivors in that room than there were chairs right by the door. And we found ourselves laughing with each other. And yeah, we're testy. Some of us will test you, for example. We might try one fact to see how you respond. We might try one shocking fact to see if you can handle it. Will you show respect? Will you be able to believe? Will you stay standing? We're going to try to find out before you necessarily are the person we tell our story to. And then there's grief. A lot has died. Our childhood is gone, never to return. Our family security is gone. Our sense of a safe world, gone. In some cases, our church. These are just a few things we must grieve. And as you know from your ministry, grief takes time. It cannot be rushed, and it does recur in flashes now and then. Shame, we've been degraded. Abuse is degrading. Abuse dehumanizes us. We become an object for someone else's perversion. And the rest of our lives, we can bear that like a brand burned into our hearts, into our psyches. Or, with time, we can rediscover ourselves as God's children with all of the dignity that comes within our very being. But it's a very, very difficult process. The emotions we bring into our encounter with you may show the moment you meet us. It's what we might lead with when we encounter you. Or sometimes they get revealed over time as you get to know us. Or, even more likely, we sometimes discover giant emotions buried under facades of calm when we go into therapy. We're going to be as surprised as you are sometimes. And as you learn more with each person, you will find yourself adjusting how you shake people's hands, how you say what you say, how you set up your office. As I mentioned, I have a seminar for that. But for now, let's consider one other way abuse has a lasting impact on how you will encounter us. For example, you may encounter us as drug abusers or alcohol abusers, or some other kind of abuser or some other kind of substance. Do you realize that some researchers claim almost 90% of women of alcoholics have been abused, and almost 70% of men alcoholics have been? Bear in mind, alcohol is only one substance we survivors use to dull or anesthetize the pain of remembering. And there's self-abuse. Some of us use that. It creates a far greater pain that drowns out the pain of abuse deep within us. It's great distraction. Toxic people and dangerous circumstances are distractions. They force us to keep the focus way outside ourselves, that is, away from the eternal pain. Then again, dangerous relationships and crisis simply are what we know. They recreate what we learned from our abusers and enablers, that is, bad people and danger and living in a state of fright are what we should expect in life and what we deserve. And now a word about mental illness. I feel very strongly ministry could do better in its interactions with the mentally ill. For example, too often the person is confused with their diagnosis. Bear in mind, when people begin therapy, they sometimes face a serious diagnosis for the first time in their life. Sometimes it's more than a kind of mental flu, if you will, mild, maybe even life-threatening, but passing. Sometimes it's chronic and lasts a lifetime. Survivors with a chronic mental illness are grappling that they have to learn how to live well with this chronic condition. At the same time, they begin grieving the loss of childhood, the loss of security, the loss of family. So have a heart and acknowledge their courage. Now, most survivors of abuse have, at one time or another, considered suicide. It's a great escape. I understand the wish. A few have acted on the idea and attempted suicide. I've known and loved survivors who succeeded in the attempt. They added grief to many lives besides my own. If you're going to extend spiritual friendship to a survivor of abuse, be sure you know the signals of suicide. Be sure to have emergency numbers available for the survivor to call. Take this possibility very seriously. And remember that for every survivor who's gotten the courage to admit having been abused, there are people who have not, many people. All of these people, those who have openly expressed their experience and those who have kept it stoically secret, are tenacious. They've earned levels of wisdom through their long suffering. They can be deeply compassionate and gentle in many or even a few circumstances, and in most cases are upstanding and helping hold up communities and families. These are in your church. These people are in the hospital work you do, in your workplace, in your school. They've never told a soul. I know couples where one spouse didn't tell the other until after decades of marriage. All of us have grieved in isolation. Some of us still are. Without a sense of the miracle of our survival, the gift of our resilience. Resilience is something studied and not yet at all understood by psychologists and researchers. It's something we survivors all have in one degree or other. And we, who can hardly trust anyone because of our experience, need others. We need people to be mirrors for us, to reflect the image of God in us back to us, so we can unlearn the false truths abusers taught us. That's where recovery leads us. We sadly do learn that we never completely recover. We even have to grieve the idea that we could. But we can and do transcend what happened to us. Yes, we must accept that what might have been never can be restored. Yet we can be transformed and have new life. Maybe you can start seeing how recovery kept leading me, at least, back to my faith. In my faith is my identity, for I am a child of God. In faith are mysteries that heal, and faith is everything that is opposite to abuse. Sadly, for survivors of abuse within the church especially, all of this is in frightening proximity to the evil that harmed us. Now, the Pascal Mystery, let's consider how it grounded me, even during years I couldn't bear to look at a priest without becoming frightened. Here, in the mystery of faith, is an innocent man who is a victim of lies. He's physically abused. He's not just crucified. Evildoers don't want just his life. They want his truth, his reality, annihilated. But then, because no one intervened, he dies. He is buried without justice. Lies seem to win. Evil seems to triumph. And among the evildoers are those with religious authority. The end of the story, however, is also about the end game, I suppose you would say, of my recovery. The triumph of Jesus is not his own doing. His new life comes when the Father lifts him up. It is God and not I who gives me the new life I seek. My efforts in recovery only got me so far. This mystery showed me the last step. It was an act of obedience, an act of surrender that did not annihilate the Son, but created a new man. It meant a lot to me, this mystery, even when I didn't consider myself Catholic. It kept me going on days when that rage just wasn't fuel enough. But here's the rub. Take a look at these list of triggers. These are things, experiences, visuals, smells, sights, sounds, that can trigger very difficult feelings and memories for survivors whom I know. Now, these are people who've worked through their recoveries. They've learned ways to manage the grief these things can trigger. But for many, the services that celebrate the Pascal Mystery, they trigger a grief and upset. So my window back into the church could do nothing more than rewound another survivor. So as a spiritual companion, your work is to come to know each unique story, each unique set of triggers. All the reasons this particular survivor resists being known. And through that, help them also recognize their own God beauty and realize that God will help lift them from a better, more healthy surrender. And how the surrender to the abuser was not with an act of will. You need to help each one of us find resurrection in our woundedness, in other words. As I remind people all the time, it's one of my favorite images, God did not define triumph by erasing wounds in Jesus' hands. The wounds remain, but they are transformed. They pour grace, mercy, and life. And what you'll find is that most survivors, though we'll never admit it, and it may be in ways that you can't see or even imagine, have and will continue to draw on the deep well of our grief to help others with something close to the attributes of Jesus, whether we know him or not. And that brings us to the end of this introduction, for the most part, about being a spiritual friend or support to a survivor of abuse. Oops, I'm making a mess of my slides here. Thank you for holding in there with me. For more information about this, you can check my website. There's another seminar about the logistics of encountering and dealing with survivors. There are articles that are royalty-free. There's all sorts of information about suicide prevention, about signs for suicide, about all sorts of types of therapy. And there are also kinds of other handouts for work that you may find useful. Consider please reading my book, Restoring Sanctuary. It's a chronicle of encounters I had with people who led me home to Christ. It also includes a very savvy priest and a savvy lay minister, and how each of them were instrumental in my reconciliation with Catholicism. You'll find it in all the usual places like Amazon and BNN.com. Proceeds go to the Victim Assistance Program in my diocese. So thank you for your attention. A special thanks to Our Lady of Lourdes, who walked me out of darkness. A special thanks to Father Mark Mealy of the Arlington Diocese, who recommended that I create this for you so that you could review it in the privacy of your offices, even if you couldn't attend some of our seminars. Feel free to reach out anytime for direct contact through my website. And I would like to say in closing, God bless us, everyone.